That Kevin McCullough.
And we're back. It is Kevin McCullough, thatkevinshow.com for all info, thatkevinstore.com for all merch. And love having Hogan Gidley back with us, even if I mispronounce his name from time to time, because he is so laser focused on what I think has been the most important issue for at least 2 election cycles. And you know where it paid off, Hogan, and we think of 22 as kind of a not successful campaign cycle. But on the local races where you had local involvement of mothers and fathers voting for school boards, they weren't able to fix those races. They weren't able to do anything funny about those. And we flipped 50 of the most hardened progressive school boards in the country, giving them control back to parents again. And so it can happen and it will work. And I believe that we've made a lot of progress. Recently, a couple of states, well, actually, Wisconsin's made a lot of news over the last 4 years because they basically had their entire COVID-19 protocol for the elections be put in front of the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, nope, none of this works. It's all unconstitutional. But even recently, there's been some additional news out of Wisconsin. What was it?
Well, there were 2 ballot referendums. What we saw, and they passed, and they were good for protecting legal votes and legal voters. I think one of the most fascinating things we've seen is while we do go through legislatures and legislatures will pass good bills, Democrat governors just veto it, say, no, sorry. So what we've done is devised plans to go around that via the people and do ballot referendums. And there were 2 specific in Wisconsin. One was the banning of Zuckerbucks, which, as you know, and your audience will remember, a lot of outside money coming in using private dollars to administer public elections, a big problem out there. And of course, all that money went only into Democrat precincts, only into Democrat counties to drive up their vote, which has been well documented at this point. So the people rejected that, voted for us and for integrity. And the second one was basically making sure that people who administer elections are election officials, not volunteers from the outside. We saw some of this, not in Wisconsin, but in Virginia, where we would see a sign outside of a polling location that says, seasonal guest workers inquire within. And we would go in and ask questions like, what does this mean? And they would say, oh, well, we're kind of understaffed, so we just let people here on visas vote, help with our elections and count all the votes. And we're like, well, that's illegal. And so in Wisconsin, we took some of the lessons we learned in other states and said, let's make sure we have those election officials doing the job because they can be held accountable. That also won as well. So 2 significant victories for election integrity there.
Well, the other thing, and you referred to it earlier in the last segment, but in Nevada and in Pennsylvania, signature verification was thrown out the window. They literally in Nevada went from it has to be on a scale of 1,000 to 1,000 by comparison. It could be normally in a normal election, they'd say, well, if it was 800 out of 1,000, it would count in terms of matching the signature. They literally lowered it to 0 out of 1,000. So you could have signed an X with a black line next to it, and it would have counted as a ballot signature. I don't know what the standards were in Pennsylvania, but I know that they were largely ignored. What are we seeing as it regards signature validation?
Well, again, Pennsylvania is one of those states, as I mentioned, that just ignored their own state law, which says you have to validate signatures. Georgia had a validation issue as well. You said they also lowered the standards quite a bit. And it's interesting because the rejection rates for those mail-in ballots were typically in the 30 percentile range. They dropped to like single digits in a lot of these states. So it was clear they were just letting ballots through. But Pennsylvania itself just had a big win on election integrity too, with the Supreme Court there, made up by mostly Democrats. Pointed to the fact that you really have to have the ballot dated properly or it's not going to count. You have to have it filled out properly. It's not going to count. Interestingly enough, some of those judges were appointed by Obama and Clinton and others. So there were Democrats who decided this. But what I really always, when I'm dealing with members of the media and people on the left, some of whom are still my friends, I try to point out, why are you guys always trying to say you don't need a voter ID to vote? Why are you trying to say you can cast ballots for 45 days? Why are you trying to say signature verifications don't matter or that ballots can come in after election day and still be counted? Why are you always trying to lower the standard for safety and security in our elections? They don't have an answer for that. They point to voter suppression as the issue. But remember, you talked about Georgia earlier. There was a big law that was passed there when the left went crazy and said it was Jim Crow 2.0 and all these racists in Georgia are doing this. They moved the All-Star game out of Georgia that hurt black businesses, by the way, and sent it to Colorado, more white, obviously, than Georgia is. And what happened in that election? It skyrocketed. Participation rates in the Black community went up like 200%, over 100% in the white community, because people stood back and went, wait a minute, I feel like I have a say-so that's going to count now because I have greater protections on my sacred voice and my sacred vote. That's what happens because of this. It's not suppression. People then want to participate in a process where they think their ballot matters.
It actually counts for something, which is what it should, but only legal ones should count.
Stick around for more of That Kevin. Next, That Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough.